The night was cold, the kind of cold that crept into your bones no matter how tightly you wrapped yourself. On a dimly lit city street, where the hum of passing cars echoed against the concrete, a young mother sat huddled with her little boy. Her clothes were worn, her face pale, and her arms wrapped around her son as if her embrace alone could shield him from the harsh winter air. She had nothing left to give, except one last blanket. And when a stranger stumbled onto that sidewalk, shivering against the biting wind, she did something no one expected. She offered him that blanket, her final source of warmth. But here's the twist. She didn't know who he really was. That stranger wasn't just anyone. He was Jonathan Pierce, a billionaire known for his empire of luxury hotels and high-rise developments. A man who lived in penthouses and traveled in private jets, now standing face-to-face with a homeless mom who gave away her last comfort without hesitation. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive into this powerful journey, a story of struggle, kindness, and a revelation that will move you to tears, I want to ask you this. What would you do if you had almost nothing left, yet someone else needed the very last thing you had? Would you give it up? Or hold on to it? Stick with me until the very end, because this story carries a lesson that may just change the way you see generosity, love, and the quiet strength of mothers who give even when they have nothing. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another life-changing story. And if this moment already touched your heart, drop a comment saying, "Kindness still exists." Let's remind the world that compassion is never wasted. Now, let's step into the beginning of Elena's journey. A woman with nothing left to lose, yet everything still to give. Elena Ramirez hadn't always been sitting on the cold concrete of that city street. Just a few years earlier, her life had looked so different. She lived in a modest but cozy apartment on the east side of town, filled with the warm sound of her son Gabriel's laughter and the faint scent of cinnamon candles she used to light in the evenings. Life was simple, but it was safe. She worked part-time at a local diner while studying for her nursing certification. She had dreams of stability, of caring for others, of building a future where Gabriel would never know the sting of hunger or the fear of losing a home. But life has a way of unraveling when you least expect it. It started small. First, her employer cut her hours at the diner. Then came the car troubles that drained her tiny savings account. Bills piled higher than her paycheck, and when her landlord raised the rent, the walls of that cozy apartment began closing in. She tried everything: double shifts, side gigs, even selling off furniture, but it was never enough. The hardest blow came one night when Gabriel fell sick. Elena rushed him to the emergency room, and though he recovered, the mountain of medical bills left her drowning. She found herself in an impossible cycle, working harder, but falling further behind. And then came the eviction notice. She remembered the day vividly, the knock on the door, the folded paper left in her trembling hands. She pleaded, begged the landlord for more time, but rules were rules. Within a week, the little apartment that had once echoed with her son's laughter was stripped bare. She carried what she could, but most of their belongings were left behind like fragments of another life. That was how Elena and Gabriel ended up on the streets. Nights were the worst. Every noise felt like a threat, every gust of wind a reminder that she was failing the one person who depended on her most. Gabriel would curl up beside her, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy. I'm not cold," though she knew he was shivering. Her heart broke every time she tucked him into her lap, pretending her arms were a fortress against the world. She fought every day to survive. Shelters were often full, food banks had long lines, and the kindness of strangers was rare. Her shoes wore thin, her hands cracked from the cold, but she never let Gabriel see her despair. She would smile through her tears, telling him bedtime stories whispered in alleys and on park benches, trying to keep some piece of childhood alive for him. It was during one of those brutal nights, when the winter chill cut like knives and her body ached from exhaustion, that Elena faced her hardest test. With Gabriel asleep beside her, wrapped in their only blanket, she spotted a man shivering just a few feet away. His coat looked thin, his movements stiff with cold. Without a second thought, she pulled the blanket from her son and draped it over the stranger. She had no idea that this act of sacrifice, born from love and desperation, was about to set into motion a chain of events she could never have imagined. Because that man wasn't just any stranger. It was Jonathan Pierce. And he was about to see Elena for who she truly was. The night was colder than usual, a bitter wind cutting through the alleyways of the city. Elena had wrapped Gabriel in her only blanket, her arms holding him close to shield him from the chill. She sat against the wall of a dimly lit convenience store, trying to remain invisible to the bustling crowd that passed by, their eyes darting away, pretending not to see her. Jonathan Reeves stepped out of the sleek black car that had just pulled up near the store. His driver handed him a folder and reminded him of the meeting waiting for him downtown. Jonathan nodded, distracted, his mind already turning over numbers and negotiations. But as he adjusted his scarf and stepped forward, something made him pause. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a small boy, maybe 5 years old, sitting against the cold brick wall. The child wasn't playing or laughing the way children usually did. Instead, he was nestled against his mother's side, his face pale, his small hands clutching at her worn coat. There was a look in his eyes Jonathan had not seen in years, a look of quiet hunger mixed with resignation. Jonathan tried to shake it off. People struggled every day in the city, he told himself. It wasn't his place to get involved. Yet something rooted his feet to the sidewalk. For the first time, he really looked at Elena. Her hair was tangled, her clothes frayed, but there was dignity in the way she held her child. She wasn't begging, wasn't shouting for help. She simply sat there, keeping Gabriel safe, whispering something softly to him as though her words alone could fill his empty stomach. Jonathan's chest tightened. Memories surfaced, nights from his own childhood when his father's business had collapsed, when meals were uncertain, when his mother had gone without so he could eat. He had buried those memories beneath years of wealth and success. But here they were, alive again, reflected in the weary eyes of a woman he had never met. Gabriel shifted and coughed lightly, a small sound that sliced through the noise of the city. Without realizing it, Jonathan took a step closer. He caught the faint tremor in Elena's hands as she pulled the blanket tighter around her son. At that moment, their eyes met. Elena's gaze was tired but unbroken, cautious but filled with love for the boy in her arms. Jonathan, used to boardrooms and power, found himself at a loss for words. The driver cleared his throat, reminding Jonathan of his schedule. But Jonathan didn't move. For the first time in years, a business deal seemed irrelevant compared to the quiet struggle unfolding just a few feet away. This was the moment where everything began to change. Jonathan had built a life where people came to him with polished smiles and iron suits, not trembling voices asking for spare change. But after that night, after seeing Elena's fragile frame bent over her son under a bridge, he couldn't shake the image. For the next few days, he found himself driving a different route home. Not the quickest one his driver usually took, but the long way around, past the broken streetlight, past the underpass where shadows clung to the walls. And each time, there they were. Elena, pulling her coat tighter against the chill, and Gabriel, curled beside her, clutching the very blanket she had once offered Jonathan. On the fourth evening, he asked his driver to stop. He had never done anything like this before, not in this part of the city. His assistant had called twice about contracts waiting for signatures, but Jonathan ignored it. He stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against gravel. Elena looked up, startled, her eyes wide as if expecting trouble. "I'm sorry if I scared you," Jonathan said softly. His voice carried no command this time, only hesitation. I wanted to check if you and Gabriel are okay." Elena blinked, unsure if this was real. People didn't check on her. People passed, sometimes tossing a coin, more often pretending she didn't exist. She studied him, his pressed coat, the watch glinting faintly in the lamplight, and immediately felt small, undeserving. "We're fine," she whispered. But her voice cracked, betraying the truth. Jonathan noticed the way Gabriel shivered, his small hands rubbing against the blanket that was far too thin for the biting cold. Something inside Jonathan shifted. He reached into his pocket and held out a card. "There's a cafe a few blocks down. Warm food. Tell them Jonathan sent you, and the bill will be covered." Elena hesitated. She had been burned before, promises made and broken, kindness offered with strings attached. But Gabriel tugged at her sleeve, eyes wide with hope. Mommy, please. Jonathan caught the desperation in the boy's voice, and it pierced him more deeply than any business loss ever could. That night, they went. Jonathan had quietly called ahead, ensuring the cafe staff treated them with respect, not pity. When Elena and Gabriel walked through the door, a table was ready, a pot of steaming soup waiting. Gabriel devoured it with such joy that Elena's eyes brimmed with tears she tried to hide. Jonathan, sitting inconspicuously at a corner table, watched. He wasn't there for recognition. He just needed to see them safe. And in that quiet moment, something crystallized inside him. This wasn't just a one-time act of generosity. It couldn't be. For the first time in years, Jonathan Caldwell, the billionaire who had everything, realized he wanted to give, not to gain. For a while, it seemed as if everything was falling into place. Elena was slowly finding her footing again, and Gabriel's laughter filled the air in ways Jonathan hadn't heard before. It was as though the pieces of two very different worlds were beginning to merge. Hers, full of quiet resilience, and his, driven by wealth, power, and relentless ambition. But with every climb, there is a storm waiting. It came one afternoon, when Jonathan invited Elena and Gabriel to his company's charity gala. He wanted to celebrate her courage, to show her a world that had long been locked behind glass doors. He thought it would be the perfect way to introduce her to a brighter future. Elena hesitated, but Gabriel's excitement pushed her to accept. She wore a borrowed dress, simple yet elegant, and walked into the grand ballroom beside Jonathan, her son clutching her hand tightly. Crystal chandeliers glistened above them, violins played softly, and conversations buzzed with a kind of polished ease that came from people who had never known true hunger. For a moment, Elena felt invisible eyes watching her. She was no longer a woman sharing laughter with Jonathan on park benches. She was a guest in his world, a world that whispered behind champagne glasses. And then it happened. A sharp voice cut through the room. "Jonathan, I didn't know you had taken up charity cases outside the boardroom," sneered Victoria Hargrove, a business rival and socialite whose sharp tongue was infamous. Her words were meant to slice, and they did. "Is this guest of yours a project, or something else?" The room froze. Eyes shifted. Elena's cheeks burned crimson, the shame of her past crashing over her like a tidal wave. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, to grab Gabriel and run. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his hand balling into a fist at his side. "Enough, Victoria," he said through clenched teeth. "Elena is my friend, and she has more dignity and courage than anyone in this room." But the damage was done. Elena's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. To her, it wasn't just an insult. It was a reminder of the gulf between them, a reminder that no matter how kind Jonathan was, she did not belong in his world. That night, after the gala, Elena avoided Jonathan's gaze. She tucked Gabriel into bed, kissed his forehead, and sat in the quiet darkness, her heart torn. Jonathan had given her hope, but maybe hope had its limits. Maybe it was cruel to believe someone like her could ever fit into the orbit of a man like him. Jonathan, too, wrestled with the weight of it. He had faced hostile takeovers, lawsuits, and boardroom betrayals, but never had he felt so powerless as he did watching Elena's spirit waver under the judgment of others. For the first time, he wondered if helping her meant more than offering comfort. It meant risking everything, including his own reputation and legacy. The climb they had built together was suddenly on shaky ground. And both of them, though for different reasons, began to question if their fragile connection could withstand the collision of their worlds. The storm had finally passed. The media frenzy that nearly tore Elena apart had quieted down, but its scars remained. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and both she and Jonathan knew that. One late afternoon, Elena sat on the edge of the same park bench where she had once given Jonathan her last blanket. Gabriel was chasing pigeons in the grass, his laughter like sunlight breaking through clouds. Jonathan approached quietly, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. He didn't speak at first. He simply sat down beside her, offering the cup with a small smile. For a long while, they said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, yes, but in a way that meant something was shifting. Finally, Jonathan broke it. "Elena, I didn't handle things right. I should have stood up for you sooner. I should have been stronger." His voice cracked slightly, the man who had commanded boardrooms now looking almost fragile. Elena looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. "Jonathan, I've lived most of my life being invisible. And for the first time, someone saw me. Really saw me. I don't regret that. But I can't go back to being someone's secret, or their shame." The truth stung, but it was the kind of sting that wakes you up. Jonathan nodded slowly. "Then let me prove I'm not that man anymore. Not with money, not with grand gestures, but with presence, with consistency." For weeks after, Jonathan kept showing up, not with luxury or promises, but with simple humanity. He walked Gabriel to school some mornings. He ate homemade soup with Elena in her tiny apartment instead of whisking her away to five-star restaurants. And little by little, trust began to regrow, not from spectacle, but from sincerity. Months later, Elena no longer lived in the shelter. With Jonathan's help, but more importantly, with her own determination, she had secured a small but beautiful home where Gabriel had his own room, filled with books and toys. One crisp winter evening, Jonathan arrived to find Gabriel proudly holding up his school certificate. "I read better than anyone in class," the boy exclaimed, his eyes beaming. Jonathan knelt down, genuinely proud. "You've got your mother's strength," he said softly. Elena, watching from the doorway, realized something profound. The billionaire she once saw only as a powerful stranger had chosen to become something more. Not a savior, not a benefactor, but family. The pain they'd endured had not disappeared, but it had transformed into a foundation. Proof that even when worlds collide, what remains can be rebuilt into something stronger. Jonathan took Elena's hand that night. "You gave me something no one else ever could, the chance to be human again." And Elena, with quiet grace, replied, "And you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope." As snowflakes drifted softly outside, the three of them sat together. No longer billionaire and homeless woman, but simply a family forged in the fire of struggle and redemption. And so, Elena's last act of kindness, offering a blanket when she had nothing, changed the course of not just her life, but Jonathan's too. Their story reminds us that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power, and that hope can be found even in the darkest winters. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more powerful narratives, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can truly change lives.